Hey, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the webinar Automating Smart Factories to Monitor Machines with n8n and CrateDB. My name is n8n, and I'll be the moderator for the webinar today. I have with me Harshil and Georg, who will be the presenters for today. So Harshil is a junior developer advocate at n8n. He's an Auth0 ambassador and a Mozilla representative. He enjoys experimenting with new tools, technologies, building cool stuff, and sharing his knowledge with the community. And we have Georg with us, who is the head of customer engineering at Crate.io. With a background in technology and process consulting, he's now driving pilot projects and transformations, working hands-on with customers and partners using one of the leading database technologies for machine data. Before I pass over to Harshil and Georg, a few housekeeping things. Feel free to send any questions that you might have via the chat panel on the right, and we'll answer those questions at the end of the webinar. We also have a couple of polls also available on the right side that we'll be asking throughout the presentation, so watch out for them. Also, if you have a problem with sound, if you can't see the presentation or anything, please let me know through the chat and we'll fix it straight away. And with that, I'd like to hand over to our presenters, Harshil and Georg.
Thank you, Tanay, for the introduction. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. So we have seen wide adoption of automation in businesses over the last few years. And in this webinar, we are going to look at what automation looks like at the scale of multiple factories. We are going to build a workflow that will monitor the health of the machines. But I wonder, Georg, how did people manage to monitor the health of their machines back in the days?
Sure. I mean, if you look at factories and what has been done in the industry for the last decades, we certainly have seen monitoring solutions that are in place to monitor the health of machines. Also, there has been some automation technologies used within the last decades, and basically building systems that are not really connected to any other systems, but to just work on their own. And yeah, I think we right now experience some sort of change in that regard, that we see more and more connection between these different layers.
Awesome. So as you mentioned, we had different systems for these machines and they were kind of isolated in themselves. So it was kind of difficult to connect different services together to build such kind of automation workflows. So we'll learn how we can use n8n to connect these services together and build an automation workflow for a smart factory. Now talking about smart factories, Georg, again, can you share some light on what smart factories are?
Yeah, sure. I mean, again, for decades, basically, people tried to automate things in the industry to produce more efficiently and produce more effectively. So there have been the rise of in the last decades of using PLCs to automate all kinds of stuff. You have these robots in factory lines to be more efficient for certain tasks. But all these systems basically were not interacting with each other, or only very limited. Let's take, for example, this robot. Let's say, take for example a robot. Basically, in the past, the robot was programmed to do one thing and to do one thing very efficiently. In order to do more complex things and to work on different kind of products, you could either reprogram this robot to do this stuff, to do all kinds of stuff, or you really integrate other systems. And I think that's the part where this smart factory comes in. It's basically the integration of various kinds of technologies. Like we see today, your robot is not only doing one thing, but you're really connecting maybe a vision system to your robot that is talking about using TCP and IT technologies that weren't there in the past.
That's interesting. So we are connecting our manufacturing operations with the IT operations, right?
Exactly. Yeah. If you also see in this example, you have this factory line where we're producing goods, and in the past, maybe and you then see it going to the truck and to go to the warehouse. In the past, all the systems were basically separated, and a user had to manage it. Nowadays, basically, you have your RFID chip based on placed on the product, and the product knows from the beginning to the end where it really is, what really happened to the product. And let's say if the product in the end passes an RFID gate to the truck, it might get the warehouse management system automatically get triggered by systems. And I think these technologies that enable that, yeah, I think one of them we're going to see today and going to see in practice today.
Awesome. Thanks, Georg, for the explanation. Now that we have the basic idea of what smart factories are, let's not waste more time and let's get started with learning the tools that we are going to use today. Now, to build our automation workflow, we will use, you guessed it right, n8n. So n8n is a fair code license tool that helps you automate tasks, sync data between various sources, and react to events all via a visual workflow editor. So to use n8n, you can either host it on your own server or you can sign up for n8n Cloud to quickly get started. To learn more about n8n, you need to first understand the basic components. Now there are two components in n8n. The first is the nodes. So nodes are the building blocks of the workflow, and currently there are 260 plus nodes that you can use for your automation. For example, you can see over here that we have a node for PagerDuty, which helps us to connect to our PagerDuty account. We also have a node for CrateDB, which helps us to connect our n8n instance to a CrateDB database. Now we can connect these nodes together and build our automation workflow. The other key component in n8n is the workflow. A workflow is a canvas on which you can place and connect these nodes together. And a workflow can be started manually or they can be triggered by a trigger node. And a workflow ends when all the active and connected nodes have processed the data. So now that we are going to build a workflow that would process the data, create an alert, and ingest the data to a database, what kind of steps do you think, Georg, should we get started first with?
I mean, the first thing for any connection in a factory, of course, is for any workflow in a factory is basically starting with the connecting the data, right? I mean, you somehow have to gather that data from the machine before you can work on that.
Right. Okay. Awesome. So let's get started. I'll switch to my n8n canvas. So this is the n8n editor UI, and by default, there you will see a start node. So a start node cannot be deleted, and you can start building a workflow from this node. And all the workflows that you build using the start node will be, you have to execute them manually. Since we want to, since I don't have access to a real smart factory at the moment, I'll create a workflow that will generate some data for us. So we want to, assuming that these sensors would generate this data every second and give us all this required information, I will use an interval node. This node will execute the workflow every second. Now we will be getting a lot of data from our sensors. Again, Georg, can you help me understand what kind of data do we usually get from sensors?
Yeah, typically in an industrial environment, we might see something like a temperature because it's always a good indication for the health of a system. Of if the temperature is too high, this probably means that there's something wrong with the machine. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. So let's get started. So we'll be we'll be generating a few information for our use case. To identify our machine separately, we will need the machine name. We'll also get the machine uptime. We'll set the temperature as well as the timestamp. So to get this information, I will use the set node. Now, a quick question for all of you. In which language can you write your code snippets in n8n? I have set a pool. Just let me know. Awesome. I see a lot of folks are answering the question, and yeah, so we can use JavaScript to write a custom code in n8n, and this is what we are going to do. Since we don't have the temperature and the uptime, we will use some JavaScript functions to generate these values. Now in the set node, you can again set any kind of value you want. You can either set a boolean that's true or false. You can set numbers and you can set string. So for this workflow, I'm just going to set all the values to string. And the first thing I want is the name of the machine. This will help us to differentiate our machine. The next is the temperature. We will use the JavaScript function over here to generate this value. Now, let me briefly explain you what this value does. So the math.random function is a built-in JavaScript function which generates a number between 0 to 1. Now we are multiplying it by 100 so that we get a number between 0 to 100, and then we are basically converting that number into an integer using the math.flow function. We also need the machine uptime, so I will use the same JavaScript code snippet to generate the machine uptime. And lastly, we need the timestamp, which will help us understand at what particular time this value was generated. Again, if you have the access to real sensors, you don't need to build this workflow. You just have to receive the data from the sensors, and I will show you next how you can do that. Now, if I click on execute node, you'll see we will generate all these values for us. The next thing is, now that we have these values, we want to append it to a queue. So I am going to use a ActiveMQ for this. For that, I'll be using the AMQP sender node. I already have set my credentials for the node. Now, if you are using a service in n8n that does not that uses a credential and you are not sure how you can configure those credentials, you can always open a documentation, go to a documentation, follow the steps, and get started with creating your own credentials and connecting n8n.
So this is also what we would typically see today in a smart factory, that we have some sort of broker, be it an AMQP broker or be it an MQTT broker. Really depends on the use case or what you like or what you prefer. And n8n basically integrates with all of them. Yeah, and it's just really easy to get the data into it, right?
Yeah, exactly. So now you see I got a message over here, which means my data got added to MQP. But till now, I was running each of these nodes manually. So the next thing I want to do is save this workflow so that it automatically runs every second. So I'm just going to call this simulate data workflow. And I'm going to activate this workflow so that it automatically generates these values for me. Awesome. So now the workflow is activated and we are getting the data which is generated every second. Now that we have the data which is generated every second, what kind of database should we use for such a use case, Georg?
Yeah, good question. I mean, lots of people might start out with a typical SQL server or the database they know and used before. But in the end, especially for larger use cases, you're really want to look into a database that is really built for time series and built for these large amounts of data, time series data. And one thing, or one of the solutions is definitely CrateDB, a solution that Crateo offers, and we are really proud of. So what makes it different from other databases is you can still use SQL that you know of. You can use PostgreSQL to connect to CrateDB, the PostgreSQL UI protocol. But in the backend, CrateDB is really built to be fully distributed, which means in these use cases where we have machine data, which might start from just one data point per 1 second, but might go up to millions of data points per second, it really is necessary to have a database that can scale with your use case. And that's really what we are aiming for with CrateDB. So on the one side, you can really ingest huge amounts of data. And on the other side, you also want to process this data, because just storing this data is basically easy, but you really want to query fast on that. And this is possible through the architecture of CrateDB, that is really fully distributed in all sense, from the insert to the indexing to the querying.
Awesome. Wow. Okay, so this is what we are going to do. Now we are going to build a workflow which will get this data from our queue, and then we'll ingest this data to CrateDB. So let me open a new empty canvas for this. So now that we have all this data coming to a queue in our ActiveMQ, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a trigger node, especially the AMQP trigger node, which will trigger our workflow whenever the new data is gets added to our queue. Again, I'm using the same credentials that I have in AMQP, and I'm using the same queue. The first thing that you have to do whenever using a trigger node is to save your workflow. This registers the trigger handler with the service, and when I click on execute node, this will give me the data from the queue. If you see over here, we got some data over here. Another important thing that we have to do is go to the options, JSON parse body, and toggle it to true. This will convert the string that we receive from the queue to a JSON object, so that we can use it later on in a workflow. Now, this workflow will do a couple of things. It will it will convert our temperature from Celsius to Fahrenheit and ingest all the information from the sensors to CrateDB. It will also check if the temperature is greater than 50 degrees or not. And if the temperature is greater than 50 degree, it will create an alert using PagerDuty, and also send the incident information to CrateDB as well. So we'll break it down, and we'll work on the first part, which is to convert the temperature from Celsius to Fahrenheit and store the information to CrateDB. To convert this temperature, I'm going to use a function node. So the function node is again another key component of n8n, which helps us to write a custom JavaScript code snippet. Now I'm going to simply paste the code that I already wrote earlier. Now let me explain you what it does. So this particular code over here gets the temperature from the previous node, that is an AMQP trigger node. We multiply it by 1.8 and then add 32 to it, basically using the calculation over here, the conversion calculation. And then we append the temperature in Fahrenheit to our items. Now, if I click on execute node, this will append the temperature in Fahrenheit, and now we can get the data. The next thing I want to do is I want to set this information so that I can add it to CrateDB. So again, I'm going to use the set node. And the data that we want to set is the machine name. Now we are referencing this value from the previous node. So I'm going to select add expression. Under the variable selector, I'm going to select current node, input data, JSON, and then in the body, I have the machine name. I'm going to do similar. I'm going to follow the similar steps for other values as well.
So while you do that, I might ask another question to the audience, and this is going to be about how to connect with CrateDB.
Sure.
And only if they choose the right answer, we can connect to CrateDB right now, right? Because we are exactly using that technology from n8n to connect to CrateDB.
Yeah. I got the temperature in Fahrenheit as well, and lastly we need the timestamp. Awesome. So now we have all the values that we need to append to our database. Now, if I execute this node, you will see that we will get some more data. Uh, so we got the data from the previous node as well as the data that we set in this particular node. But we only want the information that we are setting in this node. And to do that, you can toggle the keep only set to true. And this will only set the information of this particular node. So if I now click on execute node, you'll only see the data that is being set in this node. So here we are. So we now have all the data that we want to ingest to CrateDB. Now, before moving to add to ingest the data to CrateDB, we need to first create a table in CrateDB. So Georg, how do we create a table in CrateDB?
Well, basically the end is options. As I said, or as we know, you can interact with PostgreSQL, and one way to do it is to use the admin UI. So basically our built-in UI that comes with a CrateDB node. And yeah, I've seen you already have set up some tables there, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I already have set up some tables, but let me just quickly show what the table, what the query looks like. So I already have a table named machine data, so I'm just going to call it machine data 1. And we have this all these values that we need.
Right. So you can just use the standard SQL to create a table in CrateDB, as you would know it from your Postgres server. You can do that in CrateDB as well.
Awesome.
And,
awesome. So we now have a machine data 1 table as well. Cool. So now I'm going to go ahead and ingest this data to our machine data table. I am using the cloud CrateDB cloud, so I'm going to select my cloud credentials. Now, since we want to insert the information, the operation I have selected is insert. The schema is doc, and the table name is machine data. Now, in the columns, I can specify all the columns that I want to append the data to. So I'm just going to expand this so you all can see what all information that we are passing over here. So we are passing the temperature in Fahrenheit, temperature in Celsius, the machine name, the machine uptime, as well as the timestamp. Now I'll click on the execute node button, and this will execute the node and append the data to CrateDB. Awesome. So we completed the first part of this workflow, which was to get the data from the sensors, convert the temperature from Celsius to Fahrenheit, and ingest the data to CrateDB. Now we'll be moving ahead to the next part of the workflow is to check whenever there is an incident, report that incident through PagerDuty, and also ingest the incident data on CrateDB.
sounds good.
Okay, so for this, now we already are getting some information from the MQB node. We want to check for the temperature, and for that, you can use the if node, which is a conditional logic node. What I mean by that is you can set your conditions over here in the if node, and you can, based on your conditions, the if node will return either true or false. Now, since our condition involves a number, I'm going to select number. Again, I'm getting this value from the AMQP trigger node. Temperature Celsius, delete 0. And I want this to be larger than or equal to 50. If I execute this node, we won't be getting any output for the true branch, since the condition is false over here. So if I go to the false output, you can see the output over here. So let us execute this a couple of times so that we get the temperature greater than 50 or at least 50. Okay, so we got 30 degrees. Awesome. So we now have the temperature 68 degree. So now if I execute this node, we got the output for the true branch. So now here is the thing. So if the temperature is greater than 50, we want to create an alert. So for that, I am going to connect the true branch of the node to PagerDuty. Now again, I have already configured my credentials for the node, but you can select whatever, but you can create your own credentials. And again, if you're not sure how to create these credentials, you can hop onto a documentation, follow the steps mentioned over there, and create your credentials and connect to n8n. So I want to create an incident. The title can be, so now my title will contain both static information and dynamic information. So I'm going to do add expression, and I'm going to call this incident with, and then I'm going to get the name from the previous node. So what this does is, let's just say we have another machine which had an incident, right, which had a temperature greater than 50 degrees. So this value, the name of the machine, that will be dynamic. So you don't have to worry about creating all these values yourself. You just refer this value, and n8n creates the whole title for you. Now the service, I will select Berlin Factory, and the email that I am using with this particular account. So once I execute this node, it will create an alert on PagerDuty. It will also send me an email that there was an incident with one of these machines.
So it's really easy to get started with this whole smart factory idea and build easy, quite easily build it within half an hour, let's say, to have your alerting system ready, right?
Right, exactly, yes. So let's, now that we have this data coming in, like we have this incidents getting created, let us go ahead and add it to CrateDB so that we can use it for further analysis. So for that, again, we are just going to follow the steps that we followed earlier, but this time we will set some different values. I'm going to use the set node. I'm again going to toggle this to keep only set. This time I'm going to again select only the string values. So we want the incident ID. We'll again get this from the previous node, that's the PagerDuty node. We also want the URL of the incident. So let's just say we come back to the incident, we were doing some kind of analysis and we want to check what went, how the incident report was. So we can just go to this link and we can check the whole report for the incident. The next is the incident timestamp. And this will be the created at. And that's it. These are all the values that we want to set in this node. And now I'm going to execute the node, and it will give me all the result for this node. Awesome. So now we have set the information. The next step is to add another CrateDB node. I am using the credentials that I am using for the CrateDB node. Now for this particular CrateDB node, I'm going to use another table, that's incident data. Again, I created this table just before the webinar, so that you can see I already have a table named incident data. And I am gonna get the column name, specify all the columns that I want to add the data to. And now I'm gonna execute this node. So this will append all this information to my CrateDB. Awesome. So we now have we are now almost done with this workflow, but there are a couple of things that I would like to show you. The first thing is renaming the nodes. So let us say we come back to our workflow after a couple of days and we want to understand what is happening over here, right? So I see, okay, there are two CrateDB nodes and both of them are using the insert operation, but I'm not sure in which table are they inserting the data, right? So it's easy to, just open the node and check it, or better, you can just rename the node and just machine data. Now, when I see my workflow, I can see, okay, so this is ingesting the data into machine data. And similarly, I can rename this. So I can again, rename all these nodes to make it easy for me to get a visual cue. Another thing that you can do is use the no operation do nothing node. So as the name suggests, this node does nothing, but it helps you to get a visual cue of what is happening with your workflow. So now that we have our workflow ready, I am gonna save this workflow and activate it. Yes, activate and save. And now this will auto.
Seems like we have a bit of an issue with Harsha's connection. So while he comes back, maybe we can do another poll. So like n8n has around 260 nodes right now with a couple of different services included. And my question is, how can you connect to services that don't have a node in n8n yet? And the poll should appear on your screens now. Okay, we got one answer, two answer. Right, so to give you a bit of background on that, so n8n can essentially connect to any service that has a REST API with the HTTP request node. And basically, for any service that we don't have a node for yet, we can connect with that, and you can handle authentication as well. So, Georg, shall we do another poll?
Sure, but maybe before we do that, what is your favorite node in n8n?
I have a couple of favorite ones. I mean, I must say, CrateDB is one of my favorites as well. I wrote the node for CrateDB, and I really like the edit image node because we have release announcements going out every week. We are releasing quite often with new nodes that we added. And we had a graphic that, in the earlier days, we created manually. And it was a beautiful graphic created by one of our colleagues, had like nice isometric images. But over time, what happened was it created an issue around, we have to create a graphic every week, which is not very efficient thing to do. So what we did was, in the beginning, we just did use something like Bannerbear, where you can create templates, add logos. It did the job, but it wasn't as exquisite as the handcrafted graphic that our colleague created. So what we did was we added some new functionalities, and we learned how to do like a 2D to isometric image conversion with the edit image node, and that allowed us to create these release graphics. Now the release graphics that you see on LinkedIn and Twitter are all generated with a workflow.
Sounds great. Sounds awesome. There's more technology in the release graphics than in other products. Maybe. Yeah. Just maybe do another quick poll. I talked about CrateDB and the uniqueness of CrateDB, and we have a question also for that. So what makes CrateDB unique as a time series database?
Okay, perfect. We already have answers flowing in.
Yeah, I think that's definitely one of the unique features of CrateDB, that its scalability and its distributed nature. There are, of course, other databases using SQL, but not many or none of them really scale that way that scales for machine data.
Like, what is the scale like? Because like right now we are just using a workflow to ingest like some information, but in real life with the cases that you have seen, like what does the scale look like? Like how are the sensors? And yeah, just curious about that.
Yeah, it's definitely a good question, and I mean it's one thing to say we can scale to any size, and the other thing is that we really do it. I mean, we see use cases, especially in this IoT area, that start with let's say with a few 10 gigabytes or to 100 gigabytes of data ingested over time. But we also see customers using CrateDB and with very large use cases going up to hundreds of terabytes of data saved in a year and processed in a year. Meaning also inserts up to 1 million records per second, and really records per second, meaning multiple metrics. So yeah, that's really the way CrateDB is designed to work with this small use cases as well with these very large use cases. Yeah, I mean, in this case, of course, it's really it's only a little data, but most projects start out little and get bigger over time. That's why you really should think about using a database that can scale with your use case. And yeah, so maybe just to show you around a little bit, this is basically the admin UI where you see your current status of your cluster. Hashil is using one of our cloud databases using this trial offering that we currently have. You can start and use CrateDB for 14 days in a free trial with a small cluster. I think it has something like 6 cores. And again, as I said to you before, CrateDB is a distributed database, meaning that also in this small trial, we have not one database server running, but we have 3 database servers running and being connected together to form a cluster. And if you look at this sharding table, we see that this incident data table and this machine data table are also distributed across this cluster. And not only are they distributed, meaning that parts of this data are on different servers, but they're also replicated, that if one of the servers ever has a problem or you have to upgrade it, you can still access all the data and use your machine as it was intended. So, Hashil, how's it going? Are you ready again?
Yep, I'm all set. Let me just share my screen. I hope you all can now see my screen. But let me quickly show you what the workflows look like at the end. So this was the simulate workflow data where we were simulating the data. We are creating some random data using the set node and some JavaScript code snippet, and we are adding it to a queue in AMQP. Now again, for your use case, you don't have to build this workflow. Since I don't have access to some sensors which kind of give me this information, I am using this workflow to simulate the data. The other workflow that we are more interested in is this particular workflow, which listens for the data coming from a queue that is an AMQP. That's an active MQ queue. It processes the data. For our use case, we are converting the temperature from Celsius to Fahrenheit. We are setting the information that we want to add to CrateDB, and then we are ingesting that to CrateDB. The next thing we are also doing is we are checking the condition, if the temperature is greater than 50 or not. If the condition is true, we are creating an alert on PagerDuty. We are also setting this information for the incident that should be added to our CrateDB database. And the other thing is if the condition is false, we don't want to do anything with our workflow, right? Now, there might be some cases where you want to connect to other services as well. and n8n does not have a node for that. And I see we already had that pool, and I saw that a few of those responses were around merge node, and a lot of were around HTTP request node. So that's right. You can use the HTTP request node to connect any kind of service to that. Actually, if the service provides an API. So let me quickly show you the HTTP request node. With the HTTP request node, you can make different kind of HTTP requests. You can make a GET request, you can make a POST request, you can do a delete request, basically all the kind of HTTP requests, right? Now, based on your API, you might have different kind of authentication method, right? Your API might use some basic auth, it might use OAuth 2, it might use header auth. So you can select what kind of authentication your API uses. You can select that authentication method, create that authentication method, set it up over here, and then paste the URL of your API, and then set any kind of parameters that you want, and you are good to go. So you can now connect n8n to your service. You can add it to this particular workflow. Let's just say I want to make a request to a particular endpoint after the data gets ingested. So I can simply connect this particular node to the HTTP request node, set up HTTP request node, execute it, and this is how we connect different services using the HTTP request node. Okay, now the other scenario is, what if we want to trigger a workflow based on the activities that are happening in different services, like so for that, you can use a trigger node that's called the webhook trigger node. You can use the webhook trigger node in your workflows. So this will trigger a workflow whenever an activity is happening in an external service. So let's just say once you have created an incident on PagerDuty, you want to have another workflow that would send some messages to your messaging platform. It can be Slack, it can be MetaMost, right? So you can set up the webhook node to do that. So you simply have to select the HTTP method for your while building the workflow. You have to use the test URL, but when you build your workflow, you can switch on to your production URL so that your workflow runs automatically, and then you can set up your workflow and send those messages to your messaging platform. So this was all that I wanted to show around n8n, and yeah, let's see what's next. So yeah, now that we have a workflow which creates an incident, which ingests the data to CrateDB, what all can we do with CrateDB and n8n? Georg, you are on mute.
I guess it's the sentence of the last year. You are on mute. I guess the possibilities are endless. We have seen that you have basically already 260 nodes in that area, so you can connect different kinds of systems. Yeah, I think your imagination is basically the limit of what you can do. I think n8n is a great workflow automation technology and data technology. Yeah, I mean, I see we do see all kinds of use cases that would be relevant, like this examples that we see here, predictive analytics, where you really trigger machine learning workflows from your flow, up to cybersecurity with analyzing flows, that coming in and maybe writing out anomalies in that regard to CrateDB. But what would be in terms of massive amounts of data and what's happening right now all over the world, what would be your preferred use case, or what would you like to do as a next project?
That's a really good question. So since we already have something mentioning Bitcoin ticker, I want to build a workflow that would get some data, some financial data from the stock market as well as from the cryptocurrency market, do some kind of analysis to that, so that once I have some good data over there, I can make the correct investment and get rich.
Yeah, I mean, you also already showed this connections. You could use your HTTP node to get the latest ticker and feed it into Crate and run some analysis there on this data, and maybe then make your buy or sell decisions based on top of that, right?
Right. Yeah. Talking about some queries in CrateDB, Georg, do you want to show some queries? How people can run their queries and talk about more?
Sure. I mean, also in that regard, you can use, as I said before, you can use Postgres. If I maybe share my screen for a second, we can switch back to the database, and we can directly on this admin UI also do some queries. Like on the incident data, I can press this query table, and then I also already get the statement ready, but I can put in whatever I like. Let's do that, and we see we got all this information stored there. I can use standard SQL in that regard. I can use my where conditions and say, okay, I want only the incidents with a certain time, within a certain time range, and run this query there. Oh, I didn't find any, or didn't have any. Maybe I have to run that. Yeah, okay. Then I see I can do my filters on that, and I can basically use standard SQL. So I can also use joins, group bys, whatever I know from SQL Server, do my window functions in CrateDB, and really, get my SQL knowledge into to practice and into action. Also on very large data sets, right?
Oh, okay.
So,
That's great. So I don't have to learn any other language. My knowledge from SQL comes into place over here, and I can use that knowledge to run all sorts of queries.
yeah.
That's interesting. Awesome. So one last question for you, Gia. Where should people reach out to you, and what should be the next step if they want to get started with CrateDB?
Well, I think the next step is to get to our website, to crate.io, and or to directly go to the console and start your free 14 days trial. And if you have any questions, we have a community forum. Reach out to us, or reach out to me at georg@crate.io.
Awesome. And if you want to try out n8n, you can simply go to n8n.io, and you can install n8n on your own servers. You can run n8n locally using npm. You can sign up for n8n Cloud to quickly get started using our hosted services. And if you have any questions around n8n, feel free to reach out to us on our community forum. You can already see the link on your screen. So that's it, and thank you all for joining in, and we are open for questions.
I already see a question by Pedro. So the question is how to link tech on n8n and CrateDB from a PLC. So since I answered it from a CrateDB standpoint, but I think I can give the answer for n8n as well. So since we're basically both quite agnostic in terms of what the data can look like, you're basically free to use the text from your PLC and also insert them in CrateDB. And we have seen this in industrial use cases where we use the tech, really the tech name as a property in CrateDB, and you can interact with that.
Right. Yeah. To add on to that, n8n also has Docker images that you can run on Raspberry Pi, and a lot of our folks from the community are running n8n on Raspberry Pi as well as on Arduino. So if you run into any kind of issues, when you are trying out n8n on your Raspberry Pi or Arduino, you can reach out to us on our community forum, and you can already a lot of folks have got answers over there, so you can maybe just browse and get your answer as well.
Cool. Thank you both. So I see a couple of other questions if you have some time. So I see another question around how does n8n differ from n8n Cloud?
That's a really good question. So, n8n basically is, as I mentioned, it's a fair code license tool. So you can host it on your own server. And but the only caveat with this is that you have to manage the servers, right? So you have to update n8n whenever a new version is released. You have to keep an eye on, if it's working, functioning correctly or not. While n8n.cloud is our own hosted service, so you don't have to worry about managing the servers. You just create an account and you can get started with building your workflows. You don't have to worry about upgrading to the newer versions or worrying about the downtime as well.
Cool. Next question I see is how to request for new integrations, but I'm not a dev myself. What would I do?
That's
I'm assuming it's for n8n.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. Again, the n8n community is. I don't know. I love the community. It's not that because I'm working with n8n, but generally speaking, because if you go to a community forum, you will see a lot of feature requests. So you can just go to the community forum, create a feature request, and just share your particular use case and why like what exactly do you want, so that we know we understand what you need, and then we will create that for you.
Cool. Then I have a question around CrateDB, which asks, is CrateDB being used in factories currently?
Absolutely. I mean, factories are definitely a use case where we see, and not only do we see really, also we also really see installations in the factory next to our cloud deployments. So we have customers using CrateDB right next to the BDC, and be integrated in that and use it in an edge environment as well as in a cloud solution for aggregating this data from these different edge devices.
Cool. Then I have another one here which reads, which messaging platforms can n8n integrate with?
Okay. So there is a kind of a long list. Let me try to remember them. There's again like Mattermost, Slack. Then there is Matrix. If you are using Discord, you can connect n8n to the Discord webhook, and you can build an automation around that. Then there is Telegram. A lot of our users are using Telegram, and they have built those Telegram bots, which helps them automate their mundane tasks. And yeah, if you use SMS services a lot, and if you want to send SMS to your clients, your customers, you can use OneEdge or Twilio for that. And again, you can use HTTP request node to connect to any of the services that have a REST API.
Cool. And just as a reminder, if you have any more questions, please feel to enter it in the chat section on the right. Okay, I see another one popping up. It's for CrateDB. So how does dynamic schema work in CrateDB?
Yeah, so a feature I didn't mention yet are dynamic schemas, and it's really what does it mean? It means that you have your basic table schema that Harshil previously showed you how to create a table in CrateDB, but you don't have to have it fixed. Let's say you can mark this table as a dynamic table, which means that if Harshil then decides to insert another data point, you can just add this data point and the table automatically adjusts to that. So if you not only want to ingest the temperature, but maybe also want to ingest the force value, you can just define that in n8n. And on the ingest in CrateDB, this index is generated for this force value as well.
That's something that I didn't know. Thank you for letting me know.
Awesome. And I see a last one here around how are people using n8n?
Okay, so there have been a lot of different use cases for n8n. People are using n8n in marketing. They are using it in sales as well. There are people using it in DevOps, and again, there are a lot of different ways. and even people have are using n8n on chips, which is quite extraordinary, right? Using services on chip is like something that I never thought of. Now we collect such inspiring stories from the community and send post and then posted it on our blog. So like if you have a unique use case of how you are using n8n, do reach out to us, and we would love to share your story.
Cool. All right. So, with that, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. And in case we haven't answered your question, we will get back to you via email in the next few days. And thank you, Georg and Harshil, for presenting. And everybody, thank you so much for joining. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.
Bye.
Bye all.